Up to Daf Kuf Vav Amid Aleph, a few lines into the page. Kuf Vav Amid Aleph. We're at the words V'ha'ika Moiser Shemen. The Gemara asked the following question. The continuation, just to finish up that discussion that we had yesterday, is that the Mishnah had said that if you're not sure which mincha to bring, you bring 5 of them because you have to cover all your bets. So the Gemara asked the Kasha, according to Shimon, that you're able to have a combination of chalas and rekikin, l'chora, there should be more than 5, because there's a 6th type, which is a combination of chalas and rekikin, and then there's within the combination, you could have 3 and 7, and 6 and 4, and 8 and 2, and 1 and 9, and 5 and 5. So the Gemara had said yesterday that according to Rav Shimon, what you do is you bring all the chalas separately, you bring all the rekikin separately, and you just tell Hashem, if it was a combination, you combine it together. So the Gemara is trying to figure out if that works. So the Gemara says, I have a little bit of a problem. What do you do with the oil? You see, chalas and rekikim, this is a whole sugya we had previously. What you do with the oil, by lug of oil, by chalas and rekikim, are not the same. By chalas, you pour the entire lug of oil in, and the entire lug of oil is absorbed within the chalas. Rekikim, you just smear on top, and you give the rest to the kayin. So if it's a combination of the two, what do? So the halacha is, pashtus, when there's a combination of the two, you pour it back in, you put some on the rekikin, and then you pour the rest on the chalas. So the question is, if you're not sure what to do with it, if there's a chance that it's just rekikin, the kahan should eat it. But if there's a chance that it's chalas and rekikin, it should be poured back into the chalas. So what am I supposed to do with the oil? Again, we're trying to hedge your bets. We're trying to cover all the options. So according to Hashem, you just bring the chalas and you bring the rekikin separately, and Hashem's supposed to make it work. But if it's together, the oil is poured back into the chalas. But if it's separate, then the oil is consumed by kahanim. So how do you reconcile that? Says the Gemara, Ika Moise Shemen, Di Mechza Chalas and Mechza Rekikin Omar, Moise Shem Machzir Lechalas. If it's a combination of the two, pashtus, you take the oil, the excess oil, after you smear the rekikin, and you pour them into the chalas. But ila kula rekikin amar, but if it's entirely rekikin, Moise Hashem nechel kahanim, it should be eaten by the kahanim. Meaning, if it's entirely rekikin, it's eaten by the kahanim. If it's a combination, it's poured back into the chalas. So what do I do with the oil? So the Gemara answers, there is a shita that holds that even by a combination, you give it to the Kehanim. So in either way in this situation, you give the oil from the Rekikin to the Kehanim. Even if there's a chance that it's a combination, there's one shita that holds that by a combination of Chalas and Rekikin, the excess oil is given to the Kehanim as well. Rav Shimon Yehuda, the Tanya, Rav Shimon Yehuda, Oimim Rishim Rav Shimon, Moishchan Kaminki, when there's a combination, you take some oil, you smear it on top of the Rekikin, and the excess oil is consumed by the Kehanim. So because there's a chance that the excess oil is consumed by the Kehanim either way, you give the extra to the Kehanim.
It's like poured into a flask or something?
You had a lug of oil, you just smear on top and you have a whole thing left. So you give it to the Kehanim to eat. Now, okay, sort of a new topic. Again, what we've been dealing with is a person who comes into the Beis HaMikdash and he says, I made a neder to donate a certain type of mincha. Again, there's 5 optional minchas, and he says, I don't remember which one. So the Mishnah said, you bring all 5. So says the Gemara, the truth is there's a 6th type of mincha. Although it's not mafurish in the pasuk mentions 5 options. The truth is there's a 6th option. The 6th option is, we had 2 days ago, that a person can donate a minchas nesachim. A minchas nesachim is not a classic optional mincha. The minchas nesachim is the mincha that a person... The mincha that is associated with a carbon is called minchas nesachim. It's entirely burnt on the mizbeach. The halacha is that a person is able to donate a minchas nesachim. Although it's not the standard top 5, it's not one of the 5 mentioned, but you could explicitly say, I'm donating a minchas nesachim. So because it's possible to donate a minchas nesachim, it's possible that he said that. So a person comes into the Beis HaMikdash, he says, I don't remember what carbon I promised to donate. So you tell him, bring all 5. It should be 6. Because the minchas nesachim is technically an option. It's an option. I mean, it's not the standard mincha, but you could technically donate a minchas nesachim. Minchas nesachim is the mincha that comes with a taida, with an oila. It's oil. It's entirely burnt on the mizbech. No kamitza, entirely burnt on the mizbech. It is an option. You can bring it. It's not the standard. Like I said, it's not one of the top 5 that the pasuk describes, but it's technically an option. So meaning in other words, why is it that when a person comes into the Beis HaMikdash and he says, I promised to donate a carbon mincha, we just mentioned those 5, we don't even mention minchas nesachim. Why is minchas nesachim not dealt with? So it says the Gemara, Rava said 2 days ago that a person is able to donate a minchas esachim. So the Gemara says there's 5 reasons why a minchas esachim is so different than the rest that it's not even on our radar. Even though, yes, technically someone could donate a minchas esachim, but it's so not standardized for 5 reasons that we're not like concerned about it. It's not our concern that that's what you said. It's possible, but it's so outlandish that it's not a big concern. Why are there 5 different? What are the 5 differences? Number 1, ba biglal yochid, ba biglal tzibur lemistafkale. It's the only carbon mincha that is also brought by the tzibur. So because it's brought by the tzibur as well, it's not on the yochid's mind. The Yachid could bring it, but its standard is a carbon tzibur. It's brought with the carbon tamid, shel shachar. So because it's a carbon tzibur, the average Yachid's not thinking about it. So we're not concerned that he promised to bring that. Number 2, kika mistafkale ba beglal atzma, ba beglal zevach le mistafkale. When it's brought with a carbon. It's the standard, the minchas esachim, the classic minchas esachim is brought with a carbon. So while you could bring it without a carbon, people don't think of it because it's unlike other minchas. It's usually brought with a carbon, therefore it's not on people's radar. Number 3, kika mistafkale tuna levina, shenu tuna levina le mistafkale. It doesn't have frankincense. All the other 5 have frankincense. When you're going to bring a mincha, we assume that you want to bring it with all the fixins, which is including frankincense. And because this doesn't include frankincense, it's not on your radar. Number 4, kika mistafkale ba belug. It's much more oil. The standard mincha has a lug of oil. This one has 3. It's so much more oil that the average person is not thinking about bringing it. And number 5, kika mistafkale tuna kamitza. It's the only one that does not have a kamitza. It's entirely burnt on the mizbeach, and we assume that the average person is going to think about the average mincha, which has a kamitza, and the rest is consumed by the kehanim. This is entirely burnt, and therefore it's not on people's radar. Okay. Now, Tan Rabbanon. So this is going to take us to the end of the daf, almost the end of the daf. No, to the Mishnah. And that is, understand this well because this is today's daf. A person comes in and he says, I promise to bring a certain amount of isaron, but I don't remember how much. The max you could bring in one kli is 60. So the Tanakama said, bring 60 in a kli, and you'll cover anything. Let's say you promise to bring 29. So 29 is included in 60. Meaning you should bring 60 and you're fine. Rabbi says no good. You can't bring 60. It's no good. What do you have to bring? You have to bring 60 different versions, each one with a different number. So you bring 1, and then 2, and then 3, and then 4, and then 5, all the way to 60. What we have to figure out is what is the machlokas about? Why does Rabbi and the Rabbanan not see eye to eye? According to Rabbi, why can't you just bring one that has 60? Why not? What's the problem with that? So says the Gemara, first the Gemara does the math for us. According to Rabbi, someone asked, I think Gavin asked this on Shabbos, according to Rabbi, how many saron are you bringing? So there is a math equation. There's a way to do it. I don't know that math equation, but there is a way to do it, which is 1 to 60. Again, each one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There is a way to figure out the math equation, and the Gemara tells us exactly the math. Tan Rabbanon, pirashti mincha v'kavati b'kli echad shel isaronim. A person said, I promised to bring a certain amount of isaron in a kli. Ve'en yodeh ma pirashi, but I don't know how much. So, yavi mincha shel shishim isaronim. The Tanakama says, bring 60 in one kli, divrei chacham, because 60 covers everything, because that's the max. Rabbi Omer, no. Yavi mincha shel esroinim me'echad vat shishim. You bring 60 different kalim with 60 different amounts from 1 all the way up to 60. Shehin elef, and how much is that? How much is the total of that? Elef ushmoina meyas ushloishim. That is 1,830 isaron. That's the amount. So 1 to 60 is 1,830 isaron. Now, a person goes a step further. A person says that not only did I specify a certain amount and I don't remember how much, I don't even remember which one I did. So you're going to have to do the 60 thing for each of the 5, which is 1,830 times 5. That's how the amount of isaron you're going to have to bring. So says the Gemara, Parashi ve'en yodea, ezemen parashi, ve'en yodea kama parashti. I did the same problem. I did the 1 in the 60 thing. I don't remember how much, so I have to bring in 60 different kalim from 1 all the way to 60. And I don't even remember which type of mincha it was. And there are 5 options. So you have to bring, for each one, you have to bring the 1 in the 60 ratio, which is 1,830 isaron times 5. So it says the Gemara, how much is it? So the Tanakama just says bring 6 of 60. Bring all 5. Each one, 5 different types, each one containing 60. Just do the max. That's the Rabbi. That's the Rabbanan Shita. Rabbi says no. Yabi chamesh menachos shel shishim esron me'echad hashishim. How much is that? How much is 1,830 isaron times 5? Shem tisha alafu me'av chamishim. 9,150 isaronim in total. That's the amount that you're going to have to bring. So here's the shaila, and this is going to take us to the Mishnah, and that is, what exactly is the machlokes between Rabbi and the Rabbanan? Why is the Rabbanan, why are they comfortable? I'm not sure how many Isaron I promised. I promised a certain amount. It could be 1 to 60. I don't remember how much. So according to the Rabbanan, just bring a kli full of 60. 60 is the max. It covers everything. No, whatever you promised is covered because 60 is the max. So just bring 60. Rabbi says you can't do that. Why not? You have to bring 60 different kalim, each one with a different amount. Why is it that Rabbi does not believe you could just have one kli of 60? What's the problem? So the Gemara says, "M'maika mifligi." So option number 1 is as follows. According to the Rabbanan, let's say I promised 20. I show up with 60 because you told me to bring 60. There's an extra 40 here, right? I promised to bring 20 isaron, a mincha of 20 isaron. I don't remember how much, so the rabbi says just bring 60 because 60 covers everything. What about the extra 40? So the Rabbanan say the extra 40 is as follows. You make a stipulation to Hashem and you say, listen, what if I'm obligated 20, then 20 is the obligation, and the extra 40 is chulin. The extra 40 is not a carbon at all, meaning it's not 2 carbonos. You bring whatever the carbon is, you bring that, the amount that you set aside as a carbon is a chiyuv, okay? So let's, again, I don't remember how much. So you said a certain amount, you said I'm going to bring, let's say, whatever the amount it was. I don't remember how much. It could be 5, it could be 10, it could be 20, 25, 30, doesn't matter. You bring 60, and you tell HaKadosh Baruch Hu, whatever chiyuv amount is the chiyuv, and the excess is chulin. The excess is not kaddish at all, it's chulin. Because you can't, what do you do with the extra? You understand? What do you do with the extra? Because if the extra is this is like, I don't know if I could see blank stares. You're bringing in a certain amount, yeah? You promised Hashem a certain amount. You don't remember how much. The max is 60. What do you do with the extra? What if you said 5? So you have an additional 55 isaron in this kli. What is that? You have a couple options. The Rabbanan's explanation is, you say to Hashem, it's chulin. It's not a carbon at all. And what do? You do a kmitza, you burn that, and the rest is eaten by a kehanim. So they're going to get some chulin. They're going to get a mixture of a carbon and chulin. The Rabbanan are comfortable with that. Rebbe is not. Why? Because according to Rebbe, you're bringing chulin into the azara, which you're not allowed to do. The Rabbanan are comfortable bringing chulin into the azara when necessary. So the first machlokes is that you're stipulating the tanai that you're saying to Hashem is that the excess above what I actually obligated myself is chulin. Rebbe is not comfortable with bringing chulin into the azara, and the Rabbanan are. That's explanation number 1 of the machlokes. So says the Gemara. The machlokes is, can I bring chulin into the azara? Rabbi Savar, also lahachnis chulin lazar? Rabbi says no. So therefore this stipulation doesn't help, because the stipulation is saying that the excess above what I was obligating myself is chulin, you can't bring chulin into the azara. Rabbanan Savar, mutar lahachnis chulin lazar. The Rabbanan are comfortable with it. So that's explanation number 1. Explanation number 1 is that you're making a stipulation. You say whatever I'm obligated to bring is included in the 60, and whatever is extra is chulin. What do you mean?
He has 59 other minchas. What are you doing with those?
According to the Rebbe? According to Rebbe, you'd have to say that he makes a stipulation that each separate mincha, if it's not an obligation, it's an optional carbon. You're right. According to Rebbe, there is no chulin. You have to say that each other one is an optional carbon. Very good point. Now, the Gemara says an alternative machlekes. Rabbi says no. No, everyone agrees you can't bring chulin into the azar. It's pasha, you can't bring chulin into the azar. You can't bring a non-carbon into the azar. So what do you do here? You make a stipulation as follows. You say to Hashem, according to the Rabbanan, I'm bringing 60. Whatever I'm obligated is included in the 60. Whatever is extra is an optional carbon in the same kli. Meaning, according to the Rabbanan, you're having within one kli 2 carbonos. Optional carbon and obligatory carbon. How much? I have no idea. So if I said to Hashem 20, really, I don't remember, I bring in 60 and I say to Hashem, listen, if it was 20, then 20 is obligatory and the extra 40 is an optional carbon, all resting together. Rebbe believes you can't have a mixture of carbonos in one kli. That's why it has to be in separate kelim. So according to this, it's not chulin. Of course it can't be chulin. The machlokes is, can I make the excess an optional carbon all mixed together? Rabbi says no, the Rabbanan say yes. That's the machlokes. So that is a little easier. Rabbi Amar Dekuli Amar Salachnas Chulin Azara. Over here the machlokes is, can I have an obligatory carbon and an optional carbon all mixing together in one kli? Rabbanan Sabri mutter la'arev chayv b'nedav. Rabbanan say it's fine, and Rebbe says asir la'arev. And some machlokes, Rebbe says no. That's why Rebbe has to split it up, because he says Rabbanan have to have separate kalim. Now,
60 kalim, 20.
Well, you don't know the amount though. You'll have to have 60 kalim, and just to hedge your bets, you'll have to each one to have to be a different amount. Now, here's the issue though. Let's go with the Rabbanan. I bring in one kli 60, and I say to Hashem, listen, whatever amount I obligated myself is the obligation, and whatever's on top of that, whatever's excess, is an optional carbon. So you potentially have two carbonos in one kli, right? Because if you said 5, that means that obligatory is 5 and 55 is optional. If they're two separate carbonos, that means you need two separate kmitzas, right? Kmitza for the obligatory, kmitza for the optional. So the Gemara speaks it out. Don't you have to do kmitza twice? So the Gemara says, yes, you do kmitza twice. Okay, so the kohen is going to do kmitza once. He says, this is for the obligatory. And then he's going to do kmitza again for the optional. Okay, the comments for other comments. Here's the problem. Aren't the kmitzas going to be mixtures? Kmitza means that I have a certain content, yeah, and I do a kmitza of some of it. If I'm having an obligatory carbon, I have to do a kmitza of the obligatory content. If I have an optional carbon, I have to do a kmitza of the optional content. If everything's mixed together, how am I doing two separate kmitzas? The first kmitza is for the obligatory. The second kmitza is the optional. And if you ask the kohen, do you know what's the optional, what's the obligatory? He's like, I have no clue. So how are you doing kmitzas? Everything is mixed together. A kmitza means that I'm only getting, like if you do kmitza and instead of getting flour, you get Cheerios, it doesn't work, right? You need it to be entirely of said content. So if there's a mixture of obligation and optional, two separate carbonos in one kli, and I'm doing two kmitzas, but each kmitza has a little bit of the content of each other. You don't know what is which. So how are you doing two separate kmitzas? So the Gemara says, I'll tell you what. You stipulate to Hashem, and you say to Hashem, the first kmitza, Hashem, please make it that only the obligatory is in my hands. And the second one, you say it's only the optional. It's not like a tefillah. You're making a stipulation. The kohen is deciding everything, and the kohen is dictating that the kmitza of the first one is only the obligatory content, and the kmitza of the second is only the optional content. The kohen is making a stipulation.
So basically, it has to be separated.
But you can't separate it. But you can't, because you don't know what it is. So Hashem is separating it for you. So says the Gemara, the talib of das kohen. The kohen is the one who makes the neder, and he says like this: Kol heicha demati yada de kohen hashtachayva. The kohen basically says to Hashem, when I put my first hand in to get the kmitza, this is the chi of obligation, and the rest is going to be the optional kmitza. Okay, here's the issue. Very technical issue, but it's a very fascinating issue. So I'm doing kmitza twice. Yeah, one for the obligatory carbon and one for the optional carbon. Now let me ask you a question. Do you even know that there's two carbonos here? You don't know. I'll tell you why. What if I said I'm bringing 60 as an obligation? Then all 60 is the obligation, and there is no optional. I don't know. That's the point. I'm showing up. I'm clueless. I have no idea. Everything is on the table. There's an option that it's all the obligatory carbon because I promised myself to bring 60, and it's all obligation. There's a possibility that I only obligated myself 1, and 59 are optional. I have no idea. Because of all these possibilities, I have to make two kmitzas. One for the obligatory carbon, which I don't know how much that is, and one for the potential optional carbon, which I also don't know how much that is. Here's the problem. How do you burn it? Let me explain why. So you have these two kmitzas, yeah? How do you burn them? So you'll say, well, burn the first one first. Okay. What if the first one is the obligation? What if there's only an obligation? Yeah? And if I burn that, then the second one is actually the remnants of the obligatory, right? When you have obligatory carbon, you have the kmitza and you have the remnants. The halacha is that if some of the remnants are removed, you can't burn the kmitza. So if it's potentially one carbon, you're potentially removing some of the shirayim before you burn the kmitza. And then if you do the opposite, let's say, let's see the Gemara says. The Gemara says, Akturi hechi miktar. After removing the two kmitzas, because of the potential situation of having two different carbonos, how do you burn them? So, likter nedava beresha. Let's say I say this. Hashem, I'm going to be burning the optional carbon first. The problem is, then how do you burn the second kmitza, which is the obligation one? Dilma kula chayvi, because maybe the entire one is the obligation. The chasulu shirayim, meaning maybe the first one is really, there's only one obligation. It's 60 and it's one obligatory carbon, and that first one is really the ikr. In which case, the second one that you're burning, the problem is then it's shirayim that we're missing. Meaning, let's go with, you have two kmitzas here. Yeah, I burn the first one is the optional one. But it turns out there is no optional one. So the first one was nothing. The second one is the ikr. Because it's only obligatory. Maybe, right? You don't know the situation. Maybe it's just obligatory. The problem is, if that's the case, then some of the shirayim got burnt. Meaning, in other words, if there's only one carbon, and I burnt the first kmitza first, and it didn't count, because it wasn't really, the real one is the ikr, is the second, then the first one is just part of my mincha got lost. It's the equivalent of some of it getting flushed down the toilet. The halacha is if some of your mincha gets lost, you can't burn the kmitza. So the second one can't be the real one. Because if the first one is fake, there might be one that's fake. That's the point. There might be one that's fake. Because if there's a chance that the entire mincha is one obligatory mincha, I promised Hashem I'm going to give 60 as an obligation, then there's one carbon here. There's no two carbonos. Which means when I separate two kmitzas, one is real, one is fake. Now here's the situation. Which one is the real one? Again, it's possible they're both real, because it's possible that there's a combination of an optional carbon and an obligatory carbon. Possibly. But it's also possible that it's all one obligatory carbon, in which case the second kmitza is fake. Now here's the question. Which one do you burn first? Do you burn the fake one first? Or do you burn the real one first? If you burn the fake one first, that means that when you get to the real one, some of your mincha got lost. Can't burn it. Burn the real one first. Here's the problem. If you burn the real one first, then you're not allowed to burn any extra. What if a person just on a random Tuesday, forget about this case, just decides, I'm going to bring two kmitzas. I'm going to burn multiple kmitzas. You can't do that. You can't burn more than what God told you to burn. See, here's the problem when you have these two kmitzas. If you burn the fake one first, you can't burn the second one because now the second one is incomplete. If you burn the real one first, you can't burn the second one because now you're burning extra. So how am I burning both? With not knowing that they're two separate karbanos. That's the problem. So it says the Gemara, and if you burn the real one first, go to the next page. You can't burn the second one. Why? Because if it's one carbon, you can't burn excess. So you know what the Gemara says? I'll tell you what you can do. You take two, you burn the first one first, and you say that's the real one. The second one is potentially fake. If it's potentially fake, then how are you burning it? You make a stipulation to Hashem and you say, listen, if it's real, I'm burning it as a carbon. And if it's fake, I think you're not allowed to burn it, I'm burning it as firewood. It's my flower firewood. Say to Hashem, don't look at it as a carbon, look at it as firewood. Says the Gemara, and where do we find such a precedent? You could do this, it's a Shittas Rav Eliezer. You burn it, but you say to Hashem, if it's not obligated to be burnt, it's now firewood. Could Rav Eliezer, as Rav Eliezer said, the Tanya, Rav Eliezer Oimer, anytime you're not obligated to burn something, and you're not allowed to burn something, you could burn it as firewood. So you do is you say to Hashem, I'm burning it as firewood. Now just a little bit weiter, this Gemara is a little bit tricky, we keep going. The Gemara says, wait a minute. Maybe that's the machlokes. We're trying to figure out what is the machlokes Rabbi and the Rabbanon. Why is the Rabbanon comfortable putting 60 in one kli, and Rabbi's like, no, you have to bring 60 different kalim, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we had a couple options. We thought one option is you're stipulating the excess is chulin, and it's a machlokes whether you can do that. Gemara says a second option. You're stipulating the excess is a nedava, and it's a machlokes whether that's okay. The Gemara says I have a much more simple option. Maybe everyone agrees that you're allowed to have the excess as a nedava. Maybe everyone agrees to that. But we said there was a problem, and you do two kmitzas. But then we said, how do you burn the second one? You say it's firewood. Maybe Rebbe doesn't believe in that. Meaning maybe Rebbe and the Rabbanon, we're trying to make these big machlokas. Maybe they are in lockstep along the way. They agree that you could have a stipulation that the optional carbon is mixed in. And they believe you could do two kmitzas. Rebbe just doesn't believe you could burn something having firewood intent. And maybe that's why he believes you have to have 60. Maybe it's a much smaller machlokes. It's a much more isolated machlokes. Says the Gemara, Omerle Rav Acha b'Rav Ashi Dilma Tekuli Alma Mutal Arav Chayvim Nedava V'Hacha b'Rav Eliezer Kamiflagi the Rabbanon is Rav Eliezer Rabbi Leslie Rav Eliezer. Maybe that's the machlokes. So the Gemara says, no, I'll tell you why that can't be the machlokes. If Rebbe Taka holds like Rav Eliezer, that Rebbe's whole objection is that you can't burn the kmitza, I think you wouldn't need 60 different kalim. Meaning, if Rebbe's whole issue is, Rebbe's like, listen, I have no problem with what you're doing. You want to have a stipulation, mixtures in one kli, I got no problem. I have a technicality that I don't know how to burn the kmitza. You wouldn't need 60 kalim, you would just need 2. You would have 2 separate kalim, 2 kmitzas from 2 separate kalim, and burn them. And you would have no problem. You would not need 60. 1,830 different isaron is not needed just to solve a technicality about how to burn a second kmitza. So it says the Gemara, Amar le Isal Gedaitach l'Rebbe Mutter l'Arev Choyve b'Nedava Uder Rav Eliezer Lesle Efsher Demaisi Shitin b'Chad Mana v'Chad b'Chad Mana. You would just need 2 kalim, one with 60. Magul de kametz, 2 separate kmitzas, and burn it. You wouldn't need 60 different kalim. Okay. The Gemara now tells us a much more simple explanation of the machlokes. We're getting very confusing. This is much more easy. A person comes in, he doesn't remember how much he donated. 1 to 60 are the options. So the Rabbanan say, just bring 60. Rabbi says you can't. You know what the machlokes is? Very simple. It's super simple. What if a person promises to give $100 to tzedakah? Could he show up with 200? It's simple. That's the machlokes. Meaning, it's not complicated. It's not 2 separate karbonos. It's very simple. Rebbe believes that when you promised a certain amount to the Beis HaMikdash, you can't bring more than that. That's it. It's very simple. The Rabbanan say, you could bring more. We'll take $200. No problem. So the machlokes Rebbe and the Rabbanan is not complicated. It's not 2 kmitzas. It's not 2 karbonos. It's not chulin. It's very simple. The Rabbanan say, if you promise 20, so you bring 60. 20 is included in 60. It's a bigger carbon than you promised. And Rebbe says, no. You promised God a certain thing. You keep your word. No more, no less. So Rebbe just fundamentally believes you cannot bring a bigger carbon. By the way, it's also a separate shayla. Much more simple case. Forget about this whole case. Very simple. You promised to bring a small cow. For whatever reason, you said to Hashem, I'm going to bring a 200-pound cow. And you show up to the Beis HaMikdash with a 500-pound cow. You know what Rebbe would tell you? Go back. You say, wow, why? It's a bigger cow. Well, you promised 200 pounds. This is 500 pounds. Keep your word. Go. Even though you'd say, well, what's the difference? It's more for God. You said your word, you keep your word. So it's the same machlokes over here. It's not complicated. Rebbe believes that because you can't isolate the amount, you can't just shoot for the stars. Because what if it's too much? The Rabbanan say, too much is great. More donation. And Rebbe's like, no. You said a certain amount. You got to keep your word.
I still have the same objection.
Huh?
I still have the same objection because Rabbi, you're still bringing the other 59.
And then you'd have to say the other 59 are optional. You'd have to have the same answer. You're always going to have the same answer. Whatever the objection is, it's always going to be the same answer. So it says the Gemara, Rav Ada Kuli Alma Mutal Ariv. Actually, before we get to the machlokes, I'm sorry, I misspoke. We have one more option of the machlokes, then they'll get to the one that I just mentioned about too much. The Gemara actually says one more machlokes. The machlokes is like this. If a person promises, let's say, a 30 isaron mincha, how much oil does he bring? We had a machlokes once. I don't know if you guys remember. According to one opinion, for every isaron, there's a lug of oil. So 30 isaron is 30 lug. According to another opinion, it's for every carbon, it's 1 lug. It doesn't matter the size. So the machlokes over here is, the Rabbanan say, bring 60, right? Because the Rabbanan believe that you bring a jar of oil for every amount of flour. So it doesn't matter how many karbanos they are. Whatever amount is, you're just going to bring 60 saron, 60 lug. Rebbe believes you bring a lug per carbon. So because you don't know how many karbanos, and there's a chance that you have to have 2 karbanos in 1 jar, meaning Rebbe says that really the case is very simple. Everyone says, you're saying to Hashem, listen, I'm stipulating, I don't know how much I bring. So whatever is obligation, whatever excess is an optional carbon all mixed within together. So what's the problem? Why is Rebbe against it? I'll tell you why Rebbe's against it. Because Rebbe says you bring a jar of oil per carbon. I don't know how many carbonos there are. There might be 1 carbon, there might be 2. The Rabbanan are not bothered by this because they don't bring oil per carbon, they bring oil per weight. They bring oil per isaron. So for the Rabbanan, it doesn't matter. But according to Rebbe, you bring a lug per carbon. Because there's a chance, you don't know how many carbonos there are. There might be 1 obligatory carbon, all 60, or it might be a combination. So do I bring 1 lug or 2? Because of that stalemate, I have to bring 60. That's the Rabbanan. That's Rebbe's technicality. The Gemara says, The Kuli Almis to the Rav Eliezer, V'hacha bepluk to the Rav Eliezer ben Yaakov Rabbanan Kamiflagi Titanan. Afil mincha shel shishim yisar no shel shishim lugin. Rav ben Yaakov Amar afil mincha shel shishim yisar and ein lo luga. The machlekes is: do you bring 60 lug for 60 yisar or 1 lug per carbon? Shenemen lemincha lug shemen. Rabbanan savi karabbanan da'amri shishim lug. V'cholchad v'chad yisar and luga ka shakel. The Rabbanan say you bring oil per yisar, so it doesn't matter how many carbonas there are. The oil is going to be the same. 60 lug, 60 yisaron. Rabbi says, and the Rabbi says, you bring a lug per carbon. And therefore your stipulation of saying, it might be 1 carbon, it might be 2, doesn't help me because now I don't know how much lug to bring. I don't know how much oil to bring. Because you bring oil per carbon, not per weight. So therefore, if you bring 60, you're going to say to Hashem, if it's all an obligation, it's 1 carbon. If not, it's a combination of 2 carbonas. So Rabbi says, so how much oil should I bring? And because of that problem, he doesn't like the situation. Now the Gemara says the mention that the machlekes that I had before, which is the easiest way to explain the machlekes is, can I bring more than what I promised? The Gemara says, Ravashi Omar bekatan behevi gadlam b'kamiflagi. The machlekes is very simple. The Rabbanan say bring 60 because whatever you promised, 60 covers it. It might be more than you promised. The more the merrier. Rebbe says no. Rabbanan savri katan behevi gadlam yatsa. Rebbe savri lo yatsa. Rebbe says no. If you promise a certain amount, you have to bring set amount. You bring more, you're not yotza. That's Rebbe's machlokas. Says the Gemara, don't they also already argue by the cow? I told you the case of the cow. I promised a 200-pound cow and I bring a 500-pound cow. Rebbe says no good. So it's the same machlokas. Why are they arguing? They're arguing by size of cow and size of mincha. Why are they arguing twice? The Gemara says, don't they argue twice? Titanan, katan behevi gadol yatsa, Rebbe yisavah lo yatsa. They argue about the size of a cow that you bring, and now they're arguing about the amount of flour. It's the same machlokas. Why are they arguing twice? So the Gemara says, I'll tell you why. Tzricha, i'itmar baha kamir abanan mishum de'edi ve'dekoimisi. Avol hasan dekanavish imurin, emamayid leila Rebbe, v'yatmar baha, behi kamir Rebbe, avol baha kamir mayid leila Rabbanan. Tzricha, I'll tell you the machlok. I'll tell you why. Maybe Rebbe makes sense that you can't bring too much. I think all of us, when you give tzedakah, if you promise 360 and then you show up to tzedakah organization and say, here's $500, no tzedakah organization would say, that's not what you promised. They would say, thank you, right? More the merrier. It's understandable. Says the Gemara, the reason why they have to argue twice is because I could understand Rebbe when it comes to a cow. Why? When it comes to a cow, the bigger the animal, the more you're burning on the mizbeach. You're sort of a little bit like lahavdil, bothering God, because now you're burning more on his mizbeach. So I understand. It's like, imagine, forget about the case of tzedakah. Imagine I ask your wife. I say, Madeline, can I borrow your oven? And she's like, well, how much do you need? I'm like, I just need one tray. So in her mind, she's just allocating one part of the oven. I show up with 5 trays, the more the merrier. And she's like, yes, but you're now taking up more of my oven space. So you could argue maybe Rebbe only said his shita by the bigger cow because now you're burning more. But when it comes to a bigger mincha, it's the same kmitza size. So maybe the more the merrier. Kamashmal and no, they argue by both cases. Okay, let's just finish up. The rest of the daf is very, very easy. The Gemara, new Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Harei alai eitzim. If a person says, I promise I'm going to bring wood to the mizbeach, but he doesn't specify how much, so leyipchos mishnei gzirim, he has to bring 2 logs. Levona, if he promises to bring frankincense, leyipchos mekometz, he has to bring a kometz of frankincense. A kometz was a type of measurement. The Gemara will describe exactly what a kometz is, but a kometz was, it's apparently a fistful. It's unclear exactly if it's your fistful or the kohen's fistful, but it's a couple ounces of frankincense. Okay. Chamisha kamatzimim. There are 5 cases involving a kometz by frankincense. Number 1, ha'omer alai levona. If a person says, I promise I'm going to bring frankincense, but he doesn't say how much, leibchas mekometz. You have to bring 1 kometz. Case number 2, ha'menadev mincha. If a person promises to bring a mincha, you have imam kometz levona. You have to bring a kometz of frankincense. It's the second case of a kometz. 3, hamalas a kometz b'chutz chayiv. If you burn a frankincense in a private altar outside of the Beis Hamikdash, you're chayiv because you're bringing a carbon outside of the Beis Hamikdash. And the last 2 cases of a kometz are on the lechem aponim, on the showbread. They would have 2 spoonfuls of frankincense. Those are the last 2 examples of a kometz listed in the Torah. Shnei bazikin tu'unin shnei kamatzim. Good. A person says, the next case, a person says, I promise to give gold to the Beis Hamikdash, but he doesn't specify how much. Harei alai zahav, the halacha is leyipkos medinar zav. He has to bring at least 1 dinar. Kesef, if he promises to bring kesef silver, but he doesn't specify how much, leyipkos medinar kesef. He has to bring at least a dinar of kesef. Nechoshes, if he promises to bring copper, leyipkos mima kesef. He has to bring at least a silver maw's worth of copper. Pirashti, if he says, now let's say, okay, so a person says, I promise to give gold to the Beis HaMikdash, but he doesn't say how much, so then you have to bring a dinar. What if a person promised a certain amount? It's actually a very interesting psak. A person promised a certain amount of gold, but he doesn't remember how much. Could have been 5 ounces, could have been 10 ounces, could have been 100 ounces. What do? Would you bring the max amount of gold in the world? So, well, that's crazy. So here's what you do. The Beis HaMikdash will sit down, and they're going to put gold on the table. And once you hit an amount where you say, I definitely did not say that amount, meaning everyone has an amount in your head where you could say, listen, even if you're feeling generous, you're giving tzedakah, $100, sure. $300, sure. $1,000, if I'm feeling good. I'm going to keep going. At a certain point, you're going to be like, no chance. At a certain point, you're like, I definitely, $10,000, no way I said $10,000. Then you say, okay, you give up to that amount. So when it comes to gold, if you specify the amount but you don't remember how much, the Beis HaMikdash will put a dinar on the table and you say, is it possible you 1 dinar? Sure. 5 dinar? It's possible. 10 dinar? And then you say, no chance. 10, wait, no way. I would never have said that. Then they say, okay, then that's your max. So you give up to your max. Let's just finish up. The Mishnah says, you say, they put gold on the table until you hit a certain amount where you say, no chance. Let's just finish up. Tan Rabbanon, karban. The pasuk says if a person donates a mincha, but it describes it as a karban, which implies that there's another type of donation that a person can bring. Melamish shemisnadvin eitzim. This is the source that you're able to donate wood as a karban. V'kaman, how much is the minimum amount of wood that a person can donate without specifying? Shnei gzirim, 2 logs. V'chein oimer v'hagerolas hapeleg al karbanai eitzim. The pasuk also describes wood as a karban. Rabbi oimer, eitzim karban heim tu'unin melech. Rabbi says that if you donate wood as a karban, it's not just firewood. You have to put salt on the wood because the wood itself is the karban. Utun hagasha, and you have to place it against the mizbech, to tap it to the side of the mizbech as you would a karban mincha. Amarava uladive Rabbi eitzim tu'unin kamitza. You have to do a kamitza of wood. How do you do a kamitza of wood? Kamitza is a handful. They would make it into splinters, shavings, and you'd pick it up and burn it on the mizbeach because it's not just firewood; it's a karban in and of itself. Let's just finish up. We'll go to the next, the 2 dots on the next page. Amar Rav Papa, l'divrei Rabbi, eitz and shichem eitzim. According to Rabbi, wood needs wood. Meaning, if you're donating wood as a karban, then you have to donate wood, and then you have to supply wood to burn the wood, because the wood itself is the karban. Levona liyipchas min hakomitz. If you promise to bring a levona, the minimum amount is a komitz. Minolan, how do I know this? How do I know that is a minimum amount? Yeah, how do I know that the minimum amount of a levona is a kometz? Dichsiv, as the pasuk says, v'herim imenu bekumtso misolas hamincha umisham navis kol levona. Mekumtso, a kometz a levona. Makish levona al harama de mincha. Ma harama de mincha kometz. Just like you do a kmitza of the mincha, af levona nami kometz. Tan rabbanon harei alai lemizbeach. If a person says, this is going to take us to the end of the daf, end of the page. A person says, I promise I'm bringing lemizbeach. He doesn't say what. He just says, I'm burning on the mizbeach something. He doesn't say it could be an ola, it could be a shlamim, it could be anything. Harei alai la mizbeach, the halacha is yavi levona. You have to donate frankincense. Why? Frankincense is the most mizbeach thing that exists. Meaning if a person says, Josh says, I'm going to donate something to the mizbeach, without specifying what, it means frankincense. Why? Because frankincense is the only thing that exists that is entirely burnt on the mizbeach. Everything else has some of it that's removed. Even an ola, which is burnt to the mizbech, the hide is given to the kahanim. So if you said I'm giving something to the mizbech, you mean entirely for the mizbech? The only thing that's entirely for the mizbech is frankincense. Let's just finish up. The Gemara says, there's nothing else that's entirely burnt on the mizbech except for frankincense. Now, Pirashi, if a person says, I promise something for the mizbech, but I don't remember which thing, could be frankincense, could be an ola, then Yavi kol madav shalakar mizbech. You have to bring every iteration. You have to bring an ola, you have to bring a shlamim, you have to bring a mincha, you have to bring everything. But if you say la mizbeach, and you know that that's what you said, that means a lavona, because there's nothing else that's entirely burnt on the mizbech. The Gemara speaks out, Bisul eka ika ola. What about an ola? Isn't the ola entirely burnt? The answer is ika ora lekohanim, not the hide. The hide are given to the kohanim. Only the frankincense is entirely burnt. Ha'ika ola sa'of. What about a bird ola? Isn't that entirely burnt? The answer is Ika Mora Vinotza. There's the crop and the feathers that are removed and discarded. Ha'ika Nesachim. What about the wine libation? That's entirely poured on the Mizbeach. The answer is Lashitin Azli. That's not burnt on the Mizbeach. That's poured in the holes. That's not burnt on the Mizbeach. The word Mizbeach implies fire. The only thing that's entirely placed in the fire is frankincense. Ha'ika Minchas Nesachim. But what about Minchas Nesachim? Minchas Nesachim is entirely burnt. It's a mincha that is associated with karbanos, which is entirely burnt on the Mizbeach. So there is an example of a carbon mincha that's entirely burnt on the mizbeach, and the answer is kivan deika mincha deachli kahanim. You're right. That's the type of mincha that's entirely burnt. But because there are so many minchas that are not entirely burnt, that was not your intention. Your intention is for a category that's entirely burnt, and that's frankincense. I will stop here.